Hey guys, it's Marine here, bringing you a tank review of several tanks you'll find within the game, specifically some of the newest Tier 8 medium premium tanks. First, we're going to start off with the Russian Tier 8 premium tank, and that is the T-54 first prototype. This does see tiers 8 through 10, so it can see tanks like the E100, Mouse, JPE 100, etc. The armor on this tank is pretty good for a Tier 8. The upper front plate is, or I'm sorry, the hull is in fact the T-54 hull. So you have about 200 effective upper, 200 effective lower, and the turret is a T-44. So you have about 180 on the turret armor. The cheeks are pretty much auto balance. Both sides. The mantle right here in this area can be penned, and I'm finding at the top of the tank is pretty well overmatched. I believe that it's only 25 millimeters thick, so if a 90 mil um, or anything greater than a 75 mil touches the top of the turret, it will auto pen. But if they hit the face, you're moving back and forth about at that angle right there, they're gonna, if it's tier 8, it's gonna have a hard time penning your tank. Now, the gun on this is not the best. It's a 100 caliber. It is the first 100 mil found on the T-44. You fire 7.41 rounds per minute, which is not the best. You only have 175 millimeters penetration with your standard ammo, and only 235 with your APCR. And there's really no point in going over the HE. I don't carry any. You only carry 27 or 37 rounds in this tank, so it's really not the best. Your aim time, your dispersion is 0.38, which is absolutely horrible for a tier 8 medium tank. As well, your aim time is 2.6. This is not good. Um, it can be kind of made up for the fact that this tank does have such good armor. You're going to be in close, you're going to be brawling, but it's not the best tank when it comes to the gun. So, as far as equipment goes, I have the vertical stabilizer, I have the medium caliber gun rammer, and I carry vents. The reason this tank does not use optics is one, the the gun handling is absolutely horrible. So you could potentially use a gun lane drive, um, but you also only have 360-meter view range. Even with optics and all your crew skills, you're still going to be barely over 400 meters view range, which this tank with the gun handling, you're not going to be at that range anyway. You need to pretty much YOLO into the enemy, which this tank really does really well. Um, but I'll get more into that a little bit later. As far as ammo loadout, I go with 17 AP, 17 APCR, and no HE. Again, this carries very, very few rounds, really not worth carrying any HE at all. As far as consumables loadout, as far as consumables go, I go with a large med pack to help cut down on the chance of your crew dying, small repair pack, and auto extinguisher. You may be able to run food on this, but I've found that anything that pens your lower front plate has a good chance of damaging your fuel tanks and catching on fire. Now, playstyle. This is not a Vision, your typical Vision medium tank. It is an in-your-face brawler. And so what that means is get as close to the enemy as possible. However, when it's a tier 8 battle, you can do that pretty well. But in tier 9, not so much. It'll depend a lot upon the tanks which you're up against, unless you're going up against a lot of other tier 8s. But in tier 10 battles, this tank is rather painful to play. It is probably the best carrier at tier 8 of all of the new tanks, specifically the new premiums. But as it scales up in matchmaking, it's absolutely horrible. Um, I would actually rate this a 4 out of 10 when it comes to rating its strengths versus its weaknesses and the matchmaking it can see. So anyway, let's go into the next tank, which will be the STA-2. All right, guys, this is the STA-2. It is the Tier 8 Japanese medium tank. Really, this tank's not horrible. It does see Tier 10s, which can be a problem given this tank's mobility, but I'll get a little bit more into that later. The armor, none. Your sides are pretty weak. Your hull is pretty weak. Your turret, you can sometimes pick up patrol balances, but good luck. The gun on this is better than the T-44s. I'm sorry, T-54s. You do have 185 millimeters pen with your AP, 275 with your heat, and 45 with your HE. This thing does carry a lot of ammunition, so I do carry some HE rounds with this tank. Your accuracy, 0.37, which is okay. It's not the best for a tier 8. And your aim time, 2.2. Aim time actually doesn't feel too bad, even with that 2.2. Because the tank moves so slow, the size of your reticle really doesn't increase too much, so it's not horrible. I guess that's the best we can say. Now, as far as equipment loadout, we have Vertistab, we have the rammer, and we have optics. You do have 380 base view range. With optics, you're going to push your view range out without BIA and vents to 423, which is just fine for this tank and the role it can fill. My crew right now, I am training up a female crew in hopes of soon having the SDA2 and 2 more female crew members. I just need to focus on my missions. As far as ammunition loadout goes, I got 30 AP, 15 heat, and 5 HE. Now, I probably will bump down the HE rounds and add those to the heat, but I haven't had a need to do that yet, so we'll wait and see. As far as consumables go, I go with a small med, small repair kit, and auto extinguisher. I have not played it yet enough to determine whether or not I can get away with playing running food on this tank, but it's definitely a possibility. Playstyle. This is a ridgeline tank. It is not fast enough to do effective brawling in close quarters, unless it's tier 8 battle, which I do have a replay, which I am hoping to get up soon, of me doing exactly that on Ensk, but I am top tier. So really, you want to abuse the DPM of this tank, which is actually quite well. We have 8.45 rounds per minute, which is 1 round better than the T-54 lightweight or prototype. Um, it's pretty slow to get in position though, so you're going to be a very second line tank depending on your matchmaking. Because it does have an exceptional good penetration with its heat rounds, it can do some work in tier 10 battles, but it's not the best. Heat is a bit finicky, but you're not going to be cursing your luck like you may in the T-54 first prototype if you find yourself 1v1, unfortunately, versus a mouse or E100. You at least will have the pen to get some damage in. As far as rating this tank, I would rate it probably a 5 out of 10. And it scales better than the T-54 first prototype, so that adds a little bit to it. But the armor is less effective. Um, the mobility is absolutely horrible. It's just not a great tank. It can see some utility in strongholds if they will let you run it, and so it can make credits and it can act as a good crew trainer. But its role is going to be somewhat limited. It's not the best tank. It's not worse. Um, Unlike the T-54 first prototype, I would consider getting this tank if I earned the gold for free, which I did through skirmishes to pay for this tank. So next we're going to be getting into the Panther 8.8. All right, guys, this is the German Tier 8 medium tank. The Panther 8.8. It does see Tier 10, so again, no pref matchmaking, which does affect the value of the tank somewhat. Armor, it looks like the Panther 2, but it is absolutely not. Your upper front plate is about 50. I believe your lower is 40. Your sides are 40. Your turret face is 50. And with sloping, okay, maybe 55. As far as where you're going to bounce rounds, you're only going to bounce them off your auto bounce cheeks and maybe off your mantle. This tank does not have armor to speak of whatsoever. As far as the gun, it's actually not too bad. You have 8.7 rounds per minute, which without BIA, you have about a 5.95 second reload, which is absolutely phenomenal. You will permatrack tanks with this. You do have 203 AP pen, which is pretty good for a tier 8 medium tank, actually some of the best, but only 237 APCR pen. Um, I'd honestly rather shoot the AP than rely on the APCR. With the APCR at 237 is probably closer to about 220 effective AP, which is pretty good, but you're going to struggle to get through the lower front plate of other tanks. And you have 44 with your HE pen for 295 alpha. Now, your accuracy is absolutely phenomenal at 0.32. This is a true German gun. And your 8 time is 2.5, which on paper is pretty bad, but because the lack of mobility that this tank has, uh, it feels a lot better. It feels probably closer to 2 seconds than 2.5. It's I really can't complain too much about the gun. I'm pretty familiar with it, having ground through the Panther 2, and I've played the JT88 quite a bit on my account. Um, Playstyle, it is much like the Sta 2, a pretty second line sniper. You can The DPM that you can put out is significantly better, along with the accuracy, and it's just a little bit more effective gun for its tier, especially in a tier 8 battle where you can just get into position to just fire constantly. So again, it's a second line sniper. You get into a good solid position with an escape route where you have pretty good firing lanes and it can be effective. The camo is pretty much negligible. I expect to get spotted, so just be very cautious when you're playing it, but it can produce really good results. It has excellent credit making potential. Its utility in strongholds is not the best. It can be used. I wouldn't rely on it. And as far as pubs goes, it scales better, in my opinion, than the Sta 2 and the T54 first prototype because of the accuracy of the gun. It does allow you to hit weak points a lot more consistently with the top tier tanks, so you could have a little bit better impact. I'm still going to rate it a 6 out of 10 when it comes to overall. So it's still, in my opinion, better than the Sta 2 and the T54 first prototype. In a 1v1, I would take the T54 first prototype over this tank, but with the spectrum of tanks that this tank can see and play against, I would rate this tank a bit higher than both the Sta 2 again and the T54 first prototype. Anyway, we're going to get into the last tank, which is the AMX CDC. All right, guys, the final bunch of the new Tier 8 medium tanks. As you can see, this is the AMX CVC, and have played the crap out of this tank. I do have 2 gun marks on it, so I'm probably the most familiar out of this tank of all of the others. Again, it is a Tier 8 French tank. It can see Tier 10s, which does cut out a little bit on its value. Armor, none. Just no. You're not going to bounce anything. I have caught freak bounces off of my mantle. And if you can trick people into shooting this area and just take your tracks, it's okay. But they're going to pen. I believe the side's only 30 millimeters, so anything better than 90 mils auto pen. Your tracks are and just different points along your mantle. Pretty much the only armor this tank has. The gun is absolutely phenomenal. You have 212 AP. I'm sorry, let's go over. You fire 8.2 rounds, 8.22 rounds per minute. And with BIA and running food, you do have a sub 6 second reload. Your AP 212, which is absolutely phenomenal for a tier 8 medium. And you do have 259 APCR, which is about 250 AP. It is The AP and APCR on this tank are absolutely phenomenal. You do have 45 millimeters pen with your HE for 320 alpha. Now, your accuracy is pretty good at 0.34, but I'm going to talk for a second about this 2.2 aim time. it is not 2.2 seconds. Because of the dispersion on this gun, it blooms to a pretty good chunk of your screen. And so you have to sit there and let it aim for quite some time. And so the 2.2 seconds is very misleading. It probably feels closer to 4 seconds, really, but it's pretty daggone good. Now, as far as credit earning potential, this thing is because of the really good AP and APCR, the credit making is absolutely there. As far as equipment goes, we got your rammer, and I'm experimenting running vents on this tank instead of optics. I would rather go with optics with the tank like this, but I'm finding I'm not really doing a lot of my own spotting. And so using the vents to help cut down with the gun bloom, the additional benefits of DPM, turning radius, absolutely there. And you have to run a V-stab on this tank. Now, as far as ammunition loadout, this thing carries more ammunition than you could ever possibly shoot. I carry 55 AP, 20 APCR, and 15 HE. I think the most APCR I've ever fired in battle is 10 rounds. Mostly, I'm finding that AP is good enough for pretty much everything. Now, as far as equipment loadout goes, I go with large first aid kit to help cut down on the crew deaths. I carry a small repair kit and a large kit. Now, you can run food instead of a large, or you can run a large and food. Um, I'm running a large med kit on this tank because of the lack of armor. I'm finding that crews without it die more frequently. And so running a large med definitely helps with that. Um, if you're not in a credit bind, you can run food. I really would run food on this tank if you have the opportunity. Playstyle. You have 10 degrees of gun depression. You can flex around the battlefield like no one's business. You have a 1200 horsepower engine and you only weigh 30 tons and your top speed is 57 kilometers per hour. You accelerate to 57 almost instantaneously. This thing can absolutely flex around the battlefield. It is absolutely wonderful when it comes to positioning and getting its gun into the fight. Overall, I would rate this tank a 8 out of 10. It feels comparable to the better tier 8 medium tanks, such as the Object 416, which is limited by its gun depression, and the Pershing, which honestly, in a head-to-head fight, I'd almost rather have this tank. Almost. The Pershing is better, but this tank can put up its pretty good fight. I already have several gameplays up on my YouTube channel if you're interested, and I may link you to them. So overall, go back through them. I would rate this the worst of the bunch, but it is probably the best tier 8 uh, medium tank when facing other tier 8 medium tanks. It's can absolutely brawl like no one's business. Sta 2, I rate just slightly better because of the better pen and on both its standard and premium rounds. Panther, I rate better than both of those because of its accuracy and DPM, and the CDC is probably the best. Now, I would pay for the CDC. The Panther 80.8 and the Sta 2 I would get for free if at all possible. The T-54 first prototype honestly is not worth it. If this tank had pref matchmaking, it would be probably rated closer to 7 or 8 out of 10 because it's useless, more or less useless unless you're absolutely phenomenally skilled player in a tier 10 battle. I'm disappointed by this because I do have a pretty good Russian crew to put in it, and it's just not that pleasurable play. Anyway, guys, this was a review of all of the tier 8 premium tanks out there, and I hope you enjoyed.